Live. Jump on. We'll wait just a moment here. Hello, everyone. Gonna give it a few minutes here, let people get on. Waiting for Chelsey here. She's changing our daughter's diaper. And she'll be on here in just a moment. Tansy. Looks just light. Greetings from Fairbanks. Hello, Barbara, Vernon. Thanks for joining us. And 29 other people. Hello, Maria. Hello. It's good, Thosh, Les. Zapo. And someone from Pendleton, from the Roundup crew. Beautiful painting you have in the background. Yes, that is not an original painting by T.C. Cannon. T.C. Cannon was a really well-known Caddo artist from Oklahoma. Awesome painter. And he was Kiowa, huh?
Yeah.
He was Kiowa Caddo, I believe, but I had the opportunity to photograph his actual paintings, and some of his bigger painting. That painting right there in the back that's like a 14-foot tall painting, 10 feet wide or something. I had the opportunity of photographing it for a book, so that's what that is. So I actually reprinted it on the canvas. All right, who else is here? Now Chelsea's joining us right here. She had to change the baby's diaper.
It's good, Thosh.
Manihu to our relative here from Pyramid Lake, Paiute territory, Monica. So I wanted to say hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us today on this. We are in the 43rd week, I believe, of the Native Wellness Institute's Power Hour, and my name is Thosh Collins. I am from the Onakamiri to O'atam, the Salt River people, on my paternal side, and Wajaji Haudenosaunee from my maternal side. I'm one of the board members of the Native Wellness Institute and co-founder of an Indigenous Wellness initiative called the Well for Culture that I had co-founded with my lovely wife here, Chelsey. And joined with us is our baby girl. She's a month old. Her name is Weston. And our other baby girl is about to be 3. She's in the other room. So those of you that know us know that we're always juggling our children. So we just want to say in advance, thank you for bearing with us as we manage our children while we engage in this important conversation.
Hamadakuyapi, hello relatives. Minogishi God, it's a beautiful day. My name is Chelsey, and as Thosh mentioned, I'm the co-founder of Well for Culture, and I'm also a trainer for the Native Wellness Institute. I've been working with Native Wellness for about 5 years now, which is crazy. It has flown by in a flash, and I'm so excited to be here today to talk about this important topic. As it says in the title, we're addressing some dangerous wellness fads, and we're also going to talk about just generally about this whole culture of misinformation and false information that is getting spread in wellness social media scene lately. And it's such a complex topic, and we really look forward to getting into it.
Yeah. I think it's important to notice that, just to kind of to acknowledge that the Native Wellness Institute has been existing now for 20 years, and 2020 was our 20-year anniversary since it was when we had taken over it. I used to attend Native Wellness functions when I was a kid, so I've watched this develop and evolve over the years. But Indigenous Wellness has been around for a long time. Prior to the social media age, Indigenous Wellness is based off of the values of our ancestral people, and that's a lot of what the Native Wellness Institute is based upon. And like our director, Jillian Joseph, says, where there has been trauma, healing is the answer. And we have, we utilize and we have invest our faith and our confidence in the practices of our ancestral people and applying them to today. And in many places in Native country, our wellness practices have never stopped. They've never ceased. And now they're continuing to evolve And that's what we're doing today as Native Wellness people. We are helping to share this narrative and this idea that we can evolve too, and we can evolve with our Native practices into the future. And part of that, I believe, is we believe that requires us to also have an open mind, that we're incorporating and we're being inclusive of practices from outside of our culture that have been beneficial, such as certain practices from the Western medical practice, from alternative medicine, from our relatives in the Eastern cultures have shared with the world many different practices that we know are beneficial, and they're in alignment with a lot of ours. So I think it's important to really acknowledge that what we always say, welfare culture is also based on this teaching that indigenous lifeways, indigenous practices are inherently wellness based. They are inherently wellness based, and that really brings us into this discussion about how these many different wellness trends are coming into the world today as a result of social media, are coming into the world today. We have people that have massive platforms, that have hundreds of thousands of millions of followers, who will follow with what that person recommends and what that person is doing in their life. We're seeing that in politics. We're seeing that in the wellness space. We're seeing that in spirituality. Across the board, we're seeing that. And I think that we as human beings, we've never been in this sort of space, right, where you have access to this many people across the world whom you never met.
Right.
People have never had access to like we do today, and we're sort of seeing the problems emerge out of that practice and how that's that's happening today.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of what we want to talk about right here. There's let's jump into it. What do you have?
Yeah. So So basically, I think that the culture of misinformation and the culture of wellness and health fads is rooted in this rat race. It's this rat race to be the leader, the guru, the fastest person to gain a following or to make money off of capitalizing off of people's illness and off of people's wellness. And so it's interesting because there's so many different sides to it, and it's not that one particular school of thought is more or less guilty of it. It's anyone who has a radicalized or extremist idea about health and wellness, who exists in a single silo of thinking and is unwilling to learn, to grow, to evolve their ideas, to admit any wrongdoing, or to take into consideration the ideas and worldviews from other people or other worldviews who practice health and wellness. So those are the types of people who we are encouraging for you all to think really critically about following or about believing, is those who project a very specific lifestyle or diet or workout regimen or whatever it is, and they say it's my way or the highway, buy my book, do it this way, and everybody else is wrong, and let me tell you why, and they just try to swoop in as your savior.
Yeah.
Those are the kind of people who we really need to watch out for, and in today's world, they're everywhere.
Yeah. Talk about how, your idea of, in the beginning, when social media was first becoming a space for people to share these ideas, there was a need to present more of an alternative, unconventional approach to creating health and wellness. And then now that's kind of really gotten out of control.
Absolutely. So I think when wellness, as Thosh mentioned, wellness in general and indigenous wellness has been around for a very, very, very long time. But social media is relatively new, right? And when wellness started to be discussed on social media, it was sort of rooted in this idea of alternative thinking. And there was at the time a very valid, and there still is a very valid concern about the fact that some people were feeling like the Western standard medical model of healthcare just wasn't enough for them. It wasn't culturally relevant for certain situations. They needed more, and they needed an alternative, right? And so that's why more of this holistic thinking and wellness and all this stuff started to be discussed on social media, and different people started to present alternative modalities of healing and health.
Yeah.
However, what has happened as this wellness world has continued to evolve in the past couple of years, and like I said, this rat race has been perpetuated in everybody wanting to be the brightest and the best, is that it's gone to this extreme of now it's no longer okay, let's present alternative modalities of thinking, and let's meld together and look at the strengths of all these different worldviews. Now, for so many, it has become, like I said, my way or the highway, and it's just this culture of rejecting everyone else so that, certain people can be the best. And I think we can start by just...
Talking about food?
Well, let's talk about specifically, because I think a lot of the people who are on here are probably familiar with certain people who are guilty of this. Like, for example, the medical medium has been a really, really popular one, and I'm sure some of you know who that is. And years ago, Thosh and I both had sort of initially looked into his books and his information, because he's super popular. He's the one that started the whole celery juice trend that I think nobody is doing anymore already, like 1 year after it was initially so popular. But people like that who say it's the whole world has been lying to you forever, and I'm the one with all the answers.
Right. There's so much of that. But for those of you that don't know who the medical medium is, he's claims to be a medium. He claims that the medical information that he receives is from spirit. And for us as Native people, I think when someone typically in the community is regarded as a spiritual person, as a spiritual healer, it's usually because the community puts them in that place. It's not because that person emerges from the people and says, "Hello, everybody. I'm a medicine man. Come to me. I'll fix all your problems." That's not how it is. But in dominant culture, anyone can create a platform. Anyone can get on, and they can have this rhetoric or this narrative that will speak to people's emotions. We're seeing that in politics right now, and that will move people. And I think that there's a certain vulnerable population. There's a population of people that are vulnerable to that because they're the type of people that they'll take it at face value, as we say, right?
Yeah.
They're not critically looking at that information and saying, does this information hold up in oral tradition from indigenous cultures across Turtle Island or the world? Also, is this information being presented? Has it passed peer-reviewed randomized controls trials? Is it generally accepted by various science journals to be true? Is there evidence? Is there robust evidence that proves this? And a lot of ancestral practices, actually can be proven and shown, and right. And so we look at information that medical medium presents, and this is exactly what we're talking about right here. If you go into social media, you'll see positive review, positive testimony, one after another. But if you go to Amazon and you see the comments and the reviews on his books, the liver cleanse, the thyroid cleansing, he prescribes very specific plant-based type of diet, but he doesn't really push this like vegan or vegetarian narrative, but he pushes pretty much a plant-based diet and excludes meat and says that these things and that thing does this to your body without really providing any scientific backing on that. And also too, these plant-based foods are from all over the world, so it's not like you can kind of compile all these different ancestral knowledge about these plants and medicines to kind of back that up. But if you go to the Amazon reviews, you'll see just a plethora of negative reviews of people saying he took my money, he misdiagnosed me. He says everyone has Epstein-Barr virus, and found out they go there to the doctor. No, I don't. They have something much more severe. Put a lot of people's health in danger. So that we bring him up we're not trying to pick on him, or we're not using this as a platform or a time to pick on people's character, but we use that as an example for people, especially in Native country, to be careful of that sort of influencer, that sort of figure in the health and wellness field. We should look at what are their credentials, what is their reputation in their community like. And again, I think that he was accepted by a lot of Native people because when you're in the community, right, and somebody is upheld as a spiritual leader, as a medicinal practitioner, a healer, people don't really question it unless that person has done things right. Generally, people don't question it. So I think that, when someone like that emerges in front of Native people, it's kind of just like our normal behavior pattern to just kind of, oh, okay, that's what they say, I'll accept that, I'll listen to that. I know, because I've seen a lot of Native people take to that information being shared. And, I always say that we need to be critical of anyone who claims that they're getting information from spirit. Not that I do not believe that process is real, because I do. Because I have seen it in our communities. I have seen traditional medicinal healers access spirit and higher consciousness to, allow themselves to be what's called, what's his name, Fool's Crow said, right, a hollow bone, right, to work through and heal people. But we don't know that about that person if we've never met that person, if we don't know the community they come from. We're just taking, we're just saying, okay, I'm gonna believe you and going along with it and give you my money. And this to me is particularly problematic too in Native country, and so this is why we want to help to bring this perspective to the people a little bit.
Right. And in our communities, though, like, our spiritual leaders don't exploit their knowledge in that type of a way, and don't sell their knowledge in such a emboldened, brazen sort of way.
Some do, right? We have heard that in the ayahuasca community down south, how that's even problematic amongst their people.
Yeah, like, I guess I guess I was referring to more,
like
what we grew up with.
Right, yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
You don't see people selling spiritual knowledge like that. But, and if they are, then you kind of automatically know, okay, there's something going on there.
Yeah.
But, so it's not just spiritual knowledge that we're talking about. It's also just any sort of, like we said, wellness fads that are being pushed around. And again, there is a need for an alternative or an expanded vision of health and wellness that, like, for example, what our ancestors have always understood, which is that it should be, we should include mental, physical, spiritual, and emotional healing and health all in an interconnected sense. And I think that's where sometimes Western medicine falls short, is that it compartmentalizes everything too much and separates everything out, and it costs money, and it so there are some it's easy to critique that model and to seek something more, but
on the opposite end of the spectrum.
Right, exactly. But I lost my train of thought now.
Well, I was going to say, like, on the opposite end of the spectrum, I think that, like, and you always say too, what's your thought? You say, like, it is important that we have people out there that are sharing that alternative. But how should we navigate taking information from that or views on that?
Right.
You can scoot this way.
Sorry, she's trying to latch.
Oh, she's trying to latch, sorry.
You little baby. So yeah, let's start talking about food and some of the diets and the trends in diet culture that are.
I think diet culture has always been problematic, right? And that's something even before the emergence of social media, we've seen the statistics on diets many times, how they're short-lived, and many times how people will come off of a diet because they see it as something temporary. They come off a diet, and all of the symptoms that they were trying to heal come back, such as weight gain or fatigue or brain fog, digestive issues, acne. All these things come back. So that's sort of something that becomes problematic with diet culture. And the other thing is a big one is diets disregard what's called our bioindividuality. And bioindividuality really just acknowledges how different we are physiologically, how different we are than the person next to us, but yet we are all thinking that this across-the-board diet is going to have positive outcomes on me as it does on someone else. And I actually want to read a quote here from the person who started that term right there, bioindividuality, which was developed by someone named Joshua Rosenthal, who's the founder and director of Institute of Integrative Nutrition. And what he says is bioindividuality means there is not a one-size-fits-all diet. Each person is a unique individual with highly individualized nutritional requirements. In bioindividuality, we recognize each individual body will differ in their nutritional needs as a result of the external and internal factors like the foods we eat, our emotional thoughts, our lifestyle patterns, and the surrounding of our physical environments. And so, that's something to really take into account, because it's easy to, be a person sitting right here in front of the computer and someone gets on Dr. Oz show and says that the vegan diet, the vegetarian diet, the paleo, carnivore, keto diet, this is the way to go. This is the end all be all. This is going to heal your hyperinsulinemia. This is going to help you to burn the unwanted adipose tissue. This is going to cure your high blood pressure. And it may be true.
The most eco-friendly, the most ethical.
Yes, most ethical, most eco-friendly. Everyone wants to claim that their diet is going to do that for you. And I think that that's highly problematic to just jump on board with that narrative without doing any research and finding out, what are my lifestyle patterns? What are other factors in my life that I need to address in addition to how I'm eating that's also going to contribute to a positive health outcomes, such as your sleep, such as how much you're exercising and moving. Where are you at with tolerating and managing stress? Where are you at with your social, with your living family, your kingdom, your family? Where are you with that? These things are all important factors on your health as well, and many times it's pointed specifically on, you're not eating the right foods, you're not eating enough kale, you're not eating enough protein, and there's a lot of extremities in that. So we kind of just want to even just share about how we believe that if we look at, let's compare this concept of diet versus ancestral eating. Many people will say, hey, you're on the ancestral diet. I want to know about that. You're on an indigenous diet. But we always have to correct people and say, a diet is required for certain times and instances when people have medical issues that require them, to be on a very specific diet. But if we look at the way indigenous people had lived in their relationship to food, I want to read you our Welfare Culture's quote about what indigenous eating is, indigenous foodways. And indigenous eating is seasonal, it's local, it's from the land, it's sustainable, it's nutrient dense, and has cultural significance. And it recognizes our relationship to food and views food and food processes as something spiritual. So if you really break that down and look at that, right? What was that for Native people, right? Our people ate what made sense. Our people ate what was local from the land right there. They ate what was nutrient dense. And if we can think about that today and how do we apply that within our modern times, we can apply those elements with that. And I think that what that does is that gives us a better way of being able to sort of put together your personal food culture, right, as opposed to a diet.
Yeah. And so getting back and tying in now, again, this extremist wellness thinkers that are out there on social media sometimes and how this impacts indigenous communities. I'll give you an example of veganism. Veganism is a community that has a very, very strong and loud voice on social media and tend to be, not all vegans are bad. I'm not saying that. There's actually like a really strong history of veganism that comes from the other half of the world that has spiritual roots. And I'm not saying that people shouldn't be vegan if it makes sense for them. However, what I am critiquing is those vegans who will come on and across the board just say this is the only way to eat. They'll absolutely disregard the genocide of the buffalo that took place in North America. They'll absolutely disregard the relationship that indigenous people have to hunting and to animal protein and animal life. And for example, the culture of the food culture that is still very strong in many indigenous communities that involves this very spiritual and sacred process of harvesting animals, whether it's whale hunting in the far north or whether it's buffalo hunting in the plains, or fishing salmon in the northwest. But these are components of indigenous culture that are being attacked, aggressively attacked by certain sectors of the wellness world. For example, these extremist vegans. And they're absolutely not taking into consideration the bio-individuality of certain people who eat meat or who rely on animal proteins. And they're also not taking into account the cultural significance or the way that our relationship to animals is ethical and it is important to sustain the well-being of our communities. We're not out there trophy hunting and killing animals for fun and for sport. And so anyway, so when those communities continue to attack across the board, not taking culture into consideration, those who eat meat or those who take in animal protein, then that also has political impacts where you're looking at, it'll get across the board, folks will start to critique and not support the laws and policy that are in place to protect Indigenous communities' relationship to these animals. Land gets taken away, water rights get taken away, and there, that will then of course turn into the attack on Indigenous livelihood and culture. So that is an example of where this extremist fad diet wellness culture does really have a real impact on Indigenous communities.
Right. And if we look at a lot of what these diets require, many of them require these exotic foods from other parts of the world, that do have a high eco footprint. They want you to, make these moringa teas, this herb from Africa, an exotic herb from Africa. And it makes you question for myself when I'm told something, you need to have that, or you need to have this fruit, or, you need to have avocados in your diet every day. I think about, our ancestors got along just fine without having to have to eat spinach or kale or moringa and things like that, from other parts of the world. The Mother Earth had provided nutrients for everyone at that place and time, and I think that it's completely unnecessary. And I think that there's many vulnerable people that will think that they do need to purchase these really expensive supplements and expensive exotic foods, organic and non-GMO. Foods from other parts of the world, and it makes us question, is this in line with our values as Native people? Having a high eco footprint with the food, no matter if it's meat or plant, it's always examining that. Is that in alignment with our values? Are we eating what's seasonal? Is this really truly a nutrient dense food? Is this really a superfood? And so those are things to really take into consideration. And I think that that's when it becomes problematic, is that I'm told that I need to have this food from halfway around the world. I need to be eating that. And how did our people access that before? It's kind of like when the American settlers first came to here in Arizona in the desert, they told our O'odham that, you guys don't have milk. You need to be consuming cow's milk to get your calcium. You don't have calcium. You need that in your diet. But they didn't know that we were getting calcium from the choy cactus buds that we would harvest in the springtime. So again, that kind of brings me back to support that notion that, the Mother Earth provided nutrients for every people wherever they were, wherever they needed at that time. Someone said, what are your thoughts on dairy right there? We don't do dairy. Like, we might do a yogurt here and there, but typically, I
cheese
personally,
a little bit.
Yeah, cheese a little bit here and there. I personally can't do dairy because of what it does to my GI tract, but I think, and I actually quit drinking milk when I was like a teenager. And I remember that I was growing up in the 90s when there was that campaign, milk does a body good, and everybody was buying into it. Even just a few years ago, when I was talking to a guy and he was saying, I can't get my kid to eat right. He doesn't drink his milk. And I tell him, you need calcium. I said, he actually doesn't need to get calcium from cow's milk, and so that's a big thing that comes up in Native country right here. I'm sure some Native people can get away with it. A lot of us have mixed ancestry. Maybe we do contain the genes that allow us to digest it, but I don't, so I, stay away from it. But, getting back to what we were saying right there, looking at these diets, but even the opposite end of the vegan diet, like the carnivore diet's a really big thing right now. And they completely denounce everything, any plant food, and they say that the meat provides everything that we need, which I think in a lot of cases, the science does support that meat contains a lot of nutrients, bioavailable nutrients that we needed. Our body actually absorbs these forms, these nutrients. It absorbs them better in whole form as opposed to isolated form. And if we're taking them isolated, we need cofactor vitamins. That's what the science says based on what we're reading. So it may be true in a lot of sense, but I'll take for example our people here in the desert. We were known as corns, bean, squash people, just like people in the, in the eastern woodland. But they hunted when they could. They cottontail rabbit. They ate certain squirrel and field rats all year long. They had to acquire protein. So again, native people, we have to look at that today. We didn't jump on this ideology and say, I'm not going to eat this food. I'm not going to eat this animal because it's not necessary for me to take life to sustain. I can eat this. That's an ideology that really wasn't prevalent in native culture. I've been traveling native country for 20 years, and I've never heard no elder or cultural leader in native country and in Canada talk about they have those ideas. And I've asked people too, really, again, those are a product of veganism that has infiltrated its, the indigenous thought process in regards to food. But looking back again at the extremity of the carnivore diet, our people had a relationship with planting food. We had a relationship with the seeds, with the spirits of those foods. We had a relationship with foraging from the land. We were really connected to Mother Earth, the seasonal patterns. So we ate based on foraging, growing food, hunting, and processing all that. Again, it takes us back to these core principles and teachings. Native people ate what made sense, what was practical. Today we can bring those into our approach and also include, what do I have access to financially? What can I afford? And what if I don't have access to indigenous foods? Then we can eat what you always say, mimicking the macronutrients.
Mimicking the macronutrient profiles of what our ancestors would have eaten at the time.
Right. And so, bringing those into to the equation, what is your reservation grocery store have access to? In a lot of our people around native country, we're in very specific social economic spaces that prevent us from having a Sprouts or a Whole Foods. And many people have a bashes, say like down in Tohono or Navajo country, some places got a Dollar General. And so I think that becomes problematic when you're telling those people, you need to have organic only, you need to have non-GMO, you need to only eat plants, you need to only eat grass-fed meat, you need to only eat wild catch. And these are systemic issues, right, that are sort of beyond our control.
Right.
And someone asked me, if you couldn't hunt, would you still eat meat? I said yes. I would still go to the grocery store and get my meat. I need, because of the protein, because of my body, how I feel I need that. I would wither away if I didn't have protein.
So again, so just as in terms of medicine, the alternative health world has sought a different perspective from the Western medical model. But again, of course, indigenous people have always had a different perspective on that. The same goes for food. So rightfully so, there has emerged this conversation of seeking an alternative to corporate food culture that can be harmful in many different ways to our bodies, to the environment, etc. However, in certain cases, wellness influencers have taken that to an extreme and have initiated this fear-mongering culture that doesn't do us any good. Like Thosh said, when we're on our reservations or in our small towns or our different communities or maybe our urban centers where we only have a corner store with a small number of options and we don't have a Whole Foods and we don't have the budget for that kind of thing. Or our hunting grounds have been taken away from us and we can't go out and hunt all of our meat, or all of these different options that have factors that have limited access to ideal foods. So you get, when you're in those situations and you have these extremist wellness influencers who are saying only organic, only things with X amount of ingredients, no meat, no this, blah, 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 all of these restrictions, then what are some of us left with?
Right.
Very few, little to no options, feeling completely excluded from health and wellness, feeling like failures.
Yeah.
And that's not right, and that's not fair. It's discriminatory.
Right. And we always ask, we get a lot of people too, and we work with our fellow Native people, they say, we don't have access to these foods. What do we do? And it's like you wish you had a better answer to give a much better strategy, but I think that the best thing for them is to get their nutritional requirements as best as they can, but eat with indigenous values. You can eat with indigenous values. You can eat mindfully, and that's what our ancestors have always done. Is they ate with gratitude, because you know the work that it goes into harvesting. We grow some food on our land here. We're currently trying to build up our corn seed. So we haven't been able to eat much of our corn. We have lots of squash. We eat that. But when we're eating that, we're empowered, and we're thinking about, we're having gratitude at the forefront. Or when we're eating something that we hunted there or foraged, we don't waste it, and we think about how the work that got put into this food. You can do that too with the foods that you're getting from the grocery store. And we talked about before 7 strategies to strengthen your relationship to food, and it was all that. It was continuing to forage, it was continuing to hunt when you can, to garden, to give thanks, to honor breastfeeding in those spaces when it's needed, to cook once again, and to learn to navigate the grocery store. And navigating the grocery store and getting those foods, eating with indigenous values. Thinking about the footprints thinking about the path that food had taken to get to your plate. Thinking about the hands that were involved, the farmers that were, involved with getting that food to your plate. And even just being grateful in general that you do have something to eat. We heard a lot of stories about ancestors during the time of when they were facing starvation because the harvests weren't very plentiful. The animal herds weren't very plentiful, and they said that they still celebrated their life. Even though they didn't eat that day, they still celebrated what they had. They still celebrated they had life, and that they had each other. I think that those are ideas that we can bring into our approach when we're eating, no matter what food it is, even if it's a processed food, even if you had to go to the drive-thru, bringing in those ideas. And that's how we eat with indigenous value, and is ultimately connected to this idea of strengthening your relationship to food, and viewing food as something, as an entity to have that relationship with, and rather as opposed to this strict guidelines, unless of course your health requires it.
Yeah, and just to address some of the comments here, I see several people who are doubling down on their support of veganism, and I just want to emphasize what I said in the beginning, which is that we're not against people who choose veganism. We're against people who discriminate against all other food choices and refuse to acknowledge the cultural significance of other options that are outside of veganism. So, or the practicality of other options that are outside of veganism. So we're against anyone who is saying it's my way or the highway and refusing to see other ways or other worldviews or other valid options.
And to Stephen too, I mean, that's a great point. He says veganism is a practice that can open someone's eyes to the to the exploitation of Mother Earth.
Yeah, totally.
Absolutely. And this really, I think that any healthy relationship to food can do that as well. As I mentioned already too, when we in our household follow the practices of our ancestors, which does include hunting. When we embody a certain mindset that you take when you're going out there to take a life to feed yours. This idea that through this life, through ending this life, you're consuming that life force, you're consuming that energy, you're literally integrating the land into you, because that animal, for instance, the mule deer is what we like to hunt, is a manifestation of the land there. And so we're consuming that, and we're taking in the energy, and we have a ceremony that is done for that animal, and the animal is taken care of with care, and everything that's unedible is left back there for it to go back to the earth that helped foster its growth. There's so many teachings like that. You could, the argument can be made that opening the eyes of exploitation of Mother Earth is also possible through indigenous hunting practices, indigenous fishing practices. So again, there's not this one all end all be all way is what we're saying, and that's what those proponents of veganism tend to do, and they tend to the fear mongering and find science that says that eating meat causes cancer, eating meat causes heart disease, colon cancer, even though a lot of those studies were based off of questionnaires, off of epidemiological studies, they weren't peer reviewed, weren't robust science. And even too in our history of Native people, we never had stories of those symptoms from food. And so, it's something to think about. But I mean, that's a good question right there, Steven. Thanks for bringing that up. Again, we're not shaming. Someone says here is that we're shaming.
I think think they were responding to how we were discussing the culture of shaming, right. And they were disagreeing. Yeah. Yeah,
and just also to kind of pull back right here. There was another great question or comment. Asherly says, as aforementioned, not to dismiss your experiences, Indigenous wellness educators. What are your credentials in relation to health and wellness? And so this is where we always share is that we're advocates of Indigenous, reclaiming Indigenous health and wellness, and a lot of our stance is rooted in the practices of our ancestors that we've learned growing up in our communities, that we've learned from our elders, from our knowledge keepers. And a lot of what we learned is and also what's happening in Native country, that information is valued within the context of our communities, even though oftentimes in the Western sense, they say, well, you don't have a credential, in your Indigenous farming practice or your Indigenous hunting or your views on spirituality. So you're not, what you have to say isn't of merit. But within the context of our community and our culture, these things hold water, ancestral knowledge. And what we like to do is people today is we like to look at what the science. There's a lot of science that is in alignment with this. So
the other thing that I think is important there to note is that Thosh and I are encouraging critical thinking of those who are claiming to have all of the credentials and all of the knowledge. And we also encourage critical thinking of ourselves and of everything that we discuss. And the difference with us is we don't tell people or push things on people in this sense. Like, we don't say, this is how we eat and you need to eat exactly like this, and this is how an ancestral diet goes, and this is exactly what you need to eat. And we've never met you before, and we don't know you, and we don't know what your health is. And so we don't push information that we are not credentialed to give. Is kind of the difference. So when we do share about food and about Indigenous eating, we share, and we always make this very clear that this is what works for us, and it's not necessarily exactly how other people should be doing it. Yeah. And we also, what we are credentialed to share is our model for living a balanced lifestyle, which we call the 7 circles of wellness. And as Thosh mentioned, that comes from our backgrounds of growing up in our communities with our spiritual practices, with our many years of working with the Native Wellness Institute.
And consulting with a lot of our knowledge keepers, elders that, we have relationships to that we're always consulting and talking about, and looking at the similarities around Native country, how people have practiced and how people live a certain way. And we're really just trying to pull together a template. We work in grassroots, and we've been fortunate to have our voices valued by the Native American School of Public Health at Johns Hopkins, as well as Blue Shield, Arizona, numerous health institutions that were kind of curious about what's an Indigenous take, what does an Indigenous wellness model look like, and how can we implement that. When we give them our template and model, it's up to them on how they use that. They're the ones that are more versed in how to administer people's patterns in regards to how they eat, to administer people and the supplementation that they need, or administer how people are sleeping or how they should move their body. But we're given this general template that was rooted in how our ancestors lived. So we don't have anything to gain from that. We're not selling this. We're not selling this as a product. We're not telling you, you need to go on and buy my product and this supplementation, or buy my fitness program or anything like that. You know?
And what and we're a young family who are we have been working for years on reclaiming our health and wellness, and certain people along the way have asked us to share what we do and have been inspired by that. And they see, we have a healthy relationship. We have our 2, little daughters here, and we just live life in a way that some people have asked us about.
Yeah.
And so we'll share what we're asked. Right. And I also just have to say that I encourage you with that critical thinking, though, to ask us, like, who are you to tell us what this information? I'm fine with you asking us that question. And I'm also fine with you if you, at the end of this conversation or of whatever we say, if you feel like you don't trust us, or there's something in the back of your mind that's going, Chelsey and Thosh, I don't like those guys. They're not for me. How they live is really not the way that I would really, it doesn't inspire me. There's nothing that they do that makes me feel like I want to live that way with myself or my family. 100%, like, we encourage you to go another way and to find somebody else who does, whose information and whose modality or worldview of wellness does suit your lifestyle better. There's something out there for everyone. There really is.
Absolutely.
And I think that is the empowering side of social media and of the age of information, is you can always find folks out there who are going to share a version of wellness that fits with you. But the only thing that, like, the reason that we're having this conversation is that some of these wellness fads can be dangerous, not just as individuals, but they can also be dangerous and harmful, as I mentioned before, to Indigenous livelihood of our communities at large when we're trying to reclaim our health and our food systems.
Exactly, and that's it. When you hit the nail on the head. I always say my concern is our people. I think about my community. I'm from Salt River. Our community is bordered up with the city. As I mentioned before, we were corn bean squash people. The city of Phoenix, their waterways are based upon our ancestors. The Hookilkum, the ones that lived a long time ago, made these really elaborate canal systems, which our people had utilized, up until recent time. The city of Phoenix was based upon that. When that was taken away, we seen the dependence on government food program, government food distribution. That's when we seen the prevalence of diabetes start to emerge and the loss of indigenous foodways, the autumn foodways. So growing up in my community, diabetes was something I heard about regularly. Right now, the life expectancy for women is 52 and 48 for men. Really staggering numbers. So when I think of all that, I'm definitely much more. I am protective of my own people and my own community about what sort of medical advice, medical care that they receive. I'm protective of what they're listening to if someone's coming into the community and completely disregarding the foods that our community have eaten, and they're saying you need to eat this and this and this and this. There's a complete disregard of the cultural connection to certain foods that are being eaten. Foods that are such as our squash, the tepary beans, they're high in fiber, and science has already shown that these foods that actually they slow down the absorption of glucose into the bloodstream. And so this is good for people that are borderline diabetic, even type 2 diabetic. So, I'm really particularly, protective of our people and what sort of information they receive, which is why I like to do this community work of trying to offer another perspective and saying, this is how we bring in native wellness and native values when it comes to creating our own healthcare.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's a good question that Ashley says are there other wellness fads outside of physical health, activity, nutrition, sleep? And we did want to address actually that, yes, in spirituality, there are fads coming up. And many of these fads in the wellness world appropriate native culture. And that's the other component that gets, that we get protective over our communities too, because our sacred medicines are being exploited. Again, people who were not raised in our communities or raised with our practices are selling and exploiting our medicines. And we don't in any way claim to have ownership over medicines or ownership over who uses certain things or who has certain, access to different things. But we do need to think critically about that that appropriation of our culture and where it does get to be harmful for us. And I think it's difficult for some of us. I was born and raised in North Dakota, and I remember facing, hearing and seeing so much discrimination against our people for our spiritual practices. And everybody, I'm sure most people listening to this conversation already know that we didn't even have American Indian religious freedom until 1978 in this country. Our religions and our spiritual practices, rather, we don't consider them religions, were outlawed for so many years. People died to protect our ceremonies and our culture. And so for it to now be this trend in the non-native world is harmful and it's hurtful for many of us, I think. So I think that's another fad that needs to go to the wayside. And I think that in non-native culture, there are so many people who feel like they need to have ownership over everything. If you can burn sage, then I need to be able to burn sage too. And that's just not the mentality that our communities carry. And so it's hard for us to address those things. But if you all have comments or thoughts on that, I'd love to hear it as well, on your thoughts on appropriation of Indigenous spirituality.
This was the next subject that we wanted to get into, and not just talking about the fad diets and how they kind of clash with native foodways, but just the appropriation of our spiritual wellness and how a lot of that information is being touted by non-Indigenous people. That's been an issue for a long time. I remember being a kid and being in the presence of my dad and some of his friends and other people within the ceremonial community get together, and they're talking about, there's a non-native man who's in town. He's saying that he's this Plains tribe, and he is charging people to come into his sweat. He's telling women they need to sleep with him to come into his sweat. I remember that. That's been around for a long time, and I'm sure the 60s and beyond, that has certainly been discussed. So it's nothing new for sure. But since the age of social media, it gives people a space to reach thousands and thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people with this information. And I think that it's always important that if you're going to follow somebody for this sort of inspiration or motivation or getting a new view, is did they grow up within the context of the culture that whose values they're talking about? You must always ask that. I see a lot of young people, people of color that we talked about this, that we're seeing them utilize medicines that come from here in the Southwest, and sort of taking ownership, and other, non-Indigenous, non-brown people, white Americans that will jump on the bandwagon because they're confused. They don't know. But again, even when you're jumping into that realm, you must ask yourself, did this person grow up? Did they grow up within this culture that this medicine comes from? Did they grow up within the ayahuasca community? All of a sudden, they're this guru, or there's this end all be all person that you should follow. These are things we need to be really, really careful of, and we need to teach our young people about that, how we need to view this, really.
Also, and the other one that I would also mention to piggyback off of that we're seeing lately is a lot with this term decolonization. And it's interesting because I think this term decolonization has been around, again, in Indian country and Indigenous academia for many, many years. And it's now becoming trendy and a buzzword on social media. And that's good. It's good that people are examining that word and examining the concept behind it, and in decolonizing their lifestyles. But in certain instances, it also gets taken out of context, and you have this shaming culture of like, you're colonized and I'm not, and it kind of turns into this this warping or this ugliness of this competition over who's more or less colonized. And that's really like now this is my personal perspective, I don't think that that's appropriate. I don't think it's nice or kind or wellness oriented at all to tell another person that they're colonized, quote unquote. I think that's very short-sighted. It's very irrespective of the hurt and the pain and the harm that our communities have been through as a process of colonization. And I think that sort of mentality has no place in the wellness world.
Yeah, and it's always ironic that they're telling you that in English. Through an electronic device.
Right, through an iPhone. You're so colonized.
Yes. Oppression Olympics, exactly, and I think that narrative right there about who's more native and who's more colonized and less colonized, I think it's just an absolutely absurd mindset to have, and it's short-sighted, it's beyond the point. It's beyond the real work and the real meaningful discussions that we need to be having in native country to reclaim our health. And we should be pointing out how the health is tied to the land and how we take care of the land, and we'll see an improvement in our health. We need to teach people once again that health is also rooted in how we are treating each other with kindness, how we are acknowledging and honoring our roles within our family and our community. That's what health is. That's what native health is as well. It's seeing that there's a spiritual side to everything, and when we take spirituality out of a process, that process becomes broken and ceases to work. Which is what we are seeing, which is what you've seen with the American democracy. Not to take it take it another direction, but
that's a great point, though.
They've taken the spirituality when they took the Iroquois Great Law of Peace and put it into their Articles of Confederation or the Constitution. They removed the spirituality for it, and it's broken, and now it's ceasing, and now we're seeing where it's at here, now today. So
yes. Well, and again, this culture of extremism is reflected in health and wellness. It's reflected in politics right now. We're seeing that, and we're not going to get into that, but we can all see the harm that this causes when people's beliefs are really extreme and they're saying everyone else is wrong but me, and this is the way to go. And so, again, just to make it abundantly clear here, Thosh and I, the way that we view health and wellness, and this may be different from how other people think, and that's okay, but we think that it is important to take, many different worldviews, many different modalities of thinking, many different disciplines and perspectives into consideration, and to become your own expert, your own family's expert, and to learn what works for you and your people, and that end to observe other people out there in the world finding their own modality of health and wellness and letting them live, letting them be, do what works for them.
Yes.
And so that's what we believe. And so we're not anti-Western this, we're not, anti blah, blah, blah. We are simply pro self-empowerment, pro learning what really works. For you.
We're advocates of finding out what works for you in your specific situation, what is necessary depending on the circumstances, not this black or white of approach. It is very nuanced. Everything to live a good life, to live a well life, and to raise a well family requires a very nuanced approach. There's a time and a place for us to get a vaccination. There's a time and a place for us to take some Tylenol. There's a time and a place for us to go and harvest some herbs from the land right there for when we have a sore throat, or to make a salve because we got burnt or we got bit by something, There's a time and a place for us to get out and run and sprint. There's a time and a place for us to pick up some weights. There's a time and a place for you to go and pick up some food from the grocery store, maybe order takeout. And just like there's a time to go out and forage and grow food. To me, it's I just don't see the utility in being so extreme and excluding of things because they don't fit into this narrow-sided view of, it's not natural, So that's what we are advocates of, and that's really what we are trying to encourage our fellow Native people to think critically about this. Critical thinking is a part of our culture when you think about it. I always think about too some of the old stories about when all of our leaders of our communities were making decisions with the federal government, with Indian agents. The Indian agents would present some information. The leaders would talk about it amongst themselves. Then they would come back to the Indian agents who were expecting an immediate answer, and the native leaders told them, "Well, we'll come back to you again in time because we need to discuss this with our people and think about how this will affect our future if we make this decision now." And the Indian agents, the federal government, was surprised by that. And they didn't understand that sort of thinking. So that really goes to show, critical thinking was a part of our cultural values, and we need to continue that before we jump on board with these narratives that are being pushed on the internet and being regurgitated and spewed.
Yes. Yeah. Taking in the newborn medicine.
Yeah.
And I'm just reading some of these comments here, and I just thank you all for joining the conversation, and this is where it starts, and us just dialoguing and having the discussion and being open to change, open to learning. Our health is dependent on being open-minded and breaking down these barriers. And our health is dependent on ebbing and flowing and making adjustments as you grow, as you age, as you maybe move locations or whatever factors may be, taking place, how the world around us is constantly evolving and changing. So too should our lifestyle practices to fit. And, nobody will ever have the end-all, be-all answer to this is the exact perfect way to live, perfect way to eat, perfect way to exercise. And if they do, those are the people who you want to sort of maybe shy away from. But I think that what we can do is we can all accept that we can be on this journey of constant learning and open-mindedness with health and wellness.
Absolutely. So, I agree with that. And I want to thank everyone for jumping on here and joining us and contributing to the dialogue. Thank you to each and every one of you. And we wanted to extend our heart as our family and send our love, our energy to each and every one of you out there in the world, especially those of you that may need it, that you may be struggling with some form of anxiety, or maybe you're struggling from high stress, depression, and maybe you're struggling in an unhealthy relationship or you're having a hard time getting your health together. We want to extend our heart to you and let you know that someone's praying for you, and just to visualize and imagine who the person you want to be in the future. How do you want to think? How do you want to feel? How do you want to respond? And continue to visualize that person and make steps to get to that. There's no healing, there's no finish line in healing and wellness. It's a constant evolution. We're constantly changing and evolving and healing from something. So we wanted to just end with those and to make sure to encourage everyone to get good healthy sleep and get some vitamin D in the sun when you can. Move your body, celebrate your physical wellness, and eat mindfully, and
smile and laugh.
Smile and laugh, and exactly take social media breaks. Take a fast from social media, and just cherish those that you live with, and call all of those that you love.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. And take some time for silence as well. I think that's something that we could all use a little bit more of in our lives. And so this was fun. I enjoyed this conversation. It's fun to talk about these. It's challenging. It's so complex. We're always sorry if we misspoke at one time or another, and we hope that our information is interpreted with love, because that's, how we always mean for it to come across.
Yes.
And so, thank you all for joining us. We really appreciate it.
All right. Take care.